He laughed in her face until his fingers moved. The old billionaire was trapped in a chair in silence and in guilt. Grace, a poor young nurse, knelt beside him and whispered, "Let love heal you." He let out a dry laugh. But just a second later, something medicine claimed was impossible happened. His fingers, paralyzed for years, trembled. And in that exact moment, everything changed. Don't forget to like if stories of love and healing touch your heart. Robert Ashford had once ruled boardrooms with an iron will. Now he ruled nothing, not even the movement of his own hands. The mansion he lived in was more mausoleum than home, soaked in silence and bitterness. His world was grey, cold, controlled, until she arrived, wearing second-hand shoes and a heart full of warmth. Grace didn't flinch at his silence or his sharp tongue. She treated him like he was more than a patient, like he was still a man. She spoke gently as she adjusted his blanket, even as he scowled at her kindness. "Why do you even try?" he snapped once. Her answer, a soft smile. "Because someone should." Every day she came back, with stories, with tea, with unshakable calm. Robert tested her limits, demanded silence, barked orders, insulted her background, but Grace never responded with anger, only calm and sometimes compassion that made him uncomfortable. It was like she saw something in him he couldn't remember having. To Robert, Grace was a threat, not to his safety, but to the icy walls he had spent decades building. Her presence made the silence heavier. Her humming in the hallway made the darkness seem smaller, and her eyes, those gentle, honest eyes, felt like they knew secrets he'd long buried. He thought of firing her more than once, but the board insisted she was the best nurse for the job. "A miracle worker," they said. Robert scoffed. There were no miracles, not for men like him, not after all he'd done. And yet, those fingers had moved, a flicker of life, a whisper of something long buried. He told himself it was an accident, a muscle spasm, nerves misfiring. But when he looked at her the next day, humming while adjusting his pillow, he saw it again. Hope. She didn't mention what had happened. She didn't need to. It was in her eyes. "Love heals," she once whispered, thinking he was asleep. That phrase haunted him. Love. He had sent love away years ago, disowned his only daughter for falling in love with a man without wealth, without legacy. That act, he believed, protected his empire. But at what cost? A question Grace never asked, but one her presence forced him to face. The bitterness in Robert's heart wasn't born of age or illness. It was fed by guilt, regret, loneliness. He knew this, but he didn't know how to undo a lifetime of cold choices. Grace, in her simplicity, seemed to offer something impossible, a second chance, and that terrified him more than death. One morning, as she tucked the blanket around his feet, he caught himself watching her, not with suspicion, but with something that felt dangerously close to longing, longing for peace, for forgiveness, for family. He shook the thought away, but the tremor in his fingers the night before was real. And deep inside, he feared the truth. If love had the power to heal, what else could it bring back? Grace Thompson had never known luxury. Her childhood smelled like bleach and sounded like whispered prayers from an overworked foster mother. She grew up learning to make do with little, second-hand books, half-filled plates, and dreams too big for the small world she came from. But even in the harshest places, Grace believed in light. She always did. She became a nurse not for the paycheck. It barely covered the bills, but because healing was the only thing that ever made sense. She wasn't interested in climbing hospital ladders or being recognized. She just wanted to hold someone's hand when it shook with fear. She wanted to whisper, "You're not alone," and mean it. Her patients adored her, not because she cured diseases, but because she saw people. The lonely widow who faked chest pain to be touched. The boy with leukemia who just wanted someone to remember his birthday. Grace noticed the things others missed, and she stayed a little longer when her shift was done. But her life wasn't easy. At night, she'd go home to a crumbling apartment with flickering lights and unpaid bills stacked on the counter. Her fridge was mostly empty. Her shoes had holes, but her smile, still warm, still real. Grace had learned that joy didn't come from having, it came from giving. Meeting Robert Ashford was supposed to be temporary, a 6-week home care assignment for a client with a reputation for making nurses cry. Grace needed the money, but more than that, she needed the work to feel like it mattered. Even when people warned her, "He's cruel. Don't take it personally," she answered, "Everyone has a reason." From day one, Robert made it clear she wasn't welcome. "You're not paid to speak," he growled. She nodded. "Then I'll just listen." That answer stunned him. And somehow earned her a second day, then a week, then more. Grace didn't shrink from his anger. She met it with something disarming, gentleness. Still, she wasn't immune to the pain. There were nights she cried in the stairwell, clutching her phone but not dialing anyone, because there was no one. Grace had no family left, just a box of mementos from a mother she never met, and a tiny necklace with a heart-shaped locket she never opened. Sometimes she wondered if all her belief in people was foolish, if kindness really changed anything, but then someone would hold her hand tighter, or breathe easier after a panic attack, or whisper "thank you" like it cost gold, and that was enough for her to believe again. Working for Robert tested every part of her heart, but she saw something in him others didn't, not pity, not curiosity, just a thread. A thread she couldn't name, but felt pulling at her chest. "I think you're more than your bitterness," she once said softly while changing his IV. And though he said nothing, he didn't ask her to leave. That was enough to keep her coming back. But what Grace didn't know, couldn't know, was that her story and Robert's were already woven together by a secret neither of them had yet uncovered. Grace woke early every morning, often before the sun rose, slipping into her worn uniform and whispering affirmations into the mirror. "You are enough." "Just keep going." She smiled for her patience, but behind closed doors, life pressed hard. Rent was overdue, her shoes leaked in the rain, and her best friend Eleanor was battling a chronic illness without proper insurance. Eleanor had been her anchor through nursing school, the one who stayed up studying with her by candlelight when the power got cut. Now, Grace brought her groceries, medicine samples from the clinic, and comfort on the bad days. She even donated plasma twice a month just to buy Elena's prescriptions. But she never complained. Love meant showing up, even when no one saw. Meanwhile, Robert grew colder. His sharp remarks turned personal. "Kindness won't make you rich," he spat one day. Grace simply nodded and tucked his blanket in silence. She knew he wasn't really talking to her. He was fighting ghosts. But still his words stung. Some days she wanted to walk away. The emotional toll was heavy. Her fingers trembled from exhaustion, her eyes burned from crying in the elevator, but something deeper pushed her to stay, not out of duty, but instinct. There was something unfinished about Robert, something breaking beneath the surface. Robert, for his part, couldn't escape the past. He saw visions of a girl with golden hair and a bright laugh, the daughter he once banished, the one who dared to love a man he deemed beneath her. He remembered her tears, the echo of her voice begging, "Please don't make me choose," and his silence that sealed her fate. He told himself he'd done the right thing, protected the family name, preserved his legacy. But at night, alone in that mansion, her face returned. And for the first time in decades, regret started to rot the steel around his heart. Still, he didn't let Grace see. He refused to be weak. One rainy afternoon, Grace arrived soaked, her cheap umbrella shredded by the wind. She looked like she'd been crying. "Everything all right?" he asked without thinking. She froze, startled that he'd noticed. "I'm fine," she lied, and smiled. But Robert knew that smile. It was the same one his daughter used to wear when she was breaking inside. The next morning, Grace brought poetry to his bedside. She didn't read it aloud, just held the book and said, "Sometimes words help when nothing else does." Robert scoffed, but watched her hands tremble slightly as she turned the pages. Something inside him shifted, quietly, almost imperceptibly. Outside the estate, life kept unraveling for Grace. Her landlord taped an eviction notice on her door. Elena was hospitalized again, and Grace, despite everything, showed up on time, with tea, with clean bandages, with her soft voice and tired eyes. She was breaking, but she was still showing up. Robert, hardened by decades of walls, didn't know what to call what he felt watching her. Guilt, curiosity, maybe something older, long buried, maybe recognition. Because there was something familiar in her resilience, something that reminded him of someone he thought he'd lost forever. The house was quieter than usual that afternoon. Rain tapped gently against the tall windows, filling the silence with a rhythm that almost felt like breath. Grace sat beside Robert's bed with her back straight, a worn book of poetry resting in her lap. Her voice, soft but steady, flowed like the rain outside. She didn't read for him. She read for the silence between them. Robert stared at the ceiling, pretending not to listen. But something in her voice, its warmth, its quiet conviction, pulled at him. He had once heard that tone in lullabies, long ago, before power, before loss, before pride turned to rust. "Love is not loud," she read. "It arrives in whispers, in touches, in the echo of a name that still lives somewhere in your ribs." She looked up. "You don't have to believe it," she said, "but maybe just let it sit with you." Robert blinked slowly. He said nothing. Grace didn't push. She simply turned the page. Her hands, though calloused, moved with grace, fitting for her name. As she read the next verse, Robert felt something foreign. A flicker. A ripple deep in his arm. His right pinky twitched, just once, barely noticeable. But it was real. His breath hitched. He stared at his hand. It had been still for 6 years. Not even the finest neurologists had found hope. But now... He tried again, another twitch, then another. His fingers, dead to the world for years, were waking. Grace didn't notice. She kept reading, unaware that the miracle was unfolding beside her. Tears welled in Robert's eyes, uninvited and confusing. He looked at her differently now. Not as a nurse, not even as a girl, but as something else entirely. A force. He could have called for her attention, told her what was happening. But instead, he just watched and let himself feel, let himself remember his daughter, how she used to read to him in that same rhythm, the sound of love, not obligation, of presence, not performance. After a while, Grace closed the book gently. "That's enough for today," she whispered. "You should rest." She turned to leave, pausing at the door. "You don't have to believe in love," she said quietly. "But maybe let it believe in you." Then she was gone. Robert stared at his hand long after she left. He flexed his fingers again, weak, uneven, trembling, but alive. A miracle he couldn't explain. And in that silent room, with only the rain to witness, Robert Ashford, billionaire, tyrant, recluse, whispered the words he hadn't spoken in years, "Thank you." But Grace never heard it. Not that day. What neither of them knew was that this small spark was only the beginning of something far more powerful. The next morning, Grace arrived with her usual quiet smile, her clothes still slightly damp from the misty walk through town. She greeted Robert like always, gentle, warm, unfazed. But something had changed. He didn't look through her anymore. He looked at her. "Do you always read that kind of poetry?" he asked, startling even himself. Grace blinked. "Only the kind that reminds people they're human," she said softly. He nodded once, slowly. "Bring the book again tomorrow." That night, Robert didn't sleep. He stared at the ceiling and let himself remember her, his daughter, the one he pushed away. She had eyes like Grace, the same spark, the same stubborn softness, and suddenly the tremor in his fingers felt less like coincidence and more like consequence. Over the next few days, Grace told stories during her shifts, silly ones, sad ones, about patients who taught her something, about her childhood in foster homes, about the friend she was caring for. She never asked Robert to open up, but her words invited him to, like a door quietly left ajar. One afternoon, she spoke of a necklace, a locket she wore tucked beneath her scrubs. "It was my mum's," she said. "I never met her, Just a picture and this little heart she left behind. Robert froze. His gaze dropped to the chain around her neck. For a moment, the room went still. "Do you know who she was?" he asked, his voice hoarse. Grace shook her head. "Only her first name, Caroline." His hands clenched involuntarily on the blanket. Caroline, the name hit like thunder behind his ribs. "I'm sorry," she added. "Did I say something wrong?" Robert looked away. "No," he whispered. "Just unexpected." He didn't ask about the locket again. But from that day on, he requested her stories, asked about her childhood, about her dreams. "What do you want, Grace?" he asked one morning. She smiled, surprised. "To help people who can't afford help." Then she laughed lightly. "And maybe—" a dog. He started watching her more closely, not to criticize, but to understand the way she moved with purpose, the care she gave without being asked. He began to realize something painful. She was everything he had once hoped his daughter would be allowed to become. Before he destroyed that chance, Grace noticed the shift. He wasn't barking orders anymore. He listened. Sometimes he even asked about her day. There were still cold moments, but the ice was melting. Slowly, quietly. Word by word, story by story. One morning, as she tucked the blanket around his legs, he murmured, "You remind me of someone." She looked up. "Good memories or bad ones?" He hesitated. "The kind that ache." Neither of them knew it yet, but the ache they shared was pointing them straight toward the same truth. Grace had been unusually quiet that morning. The landlord had given her 72 hours to vacate her apartment. Elena's condition had worsened overnight. Her exhaustion was visible in the slump of her shoulders and the dullness behind her normally bright eyes, but she still showed up, because Grace always did. Robert, however, sensed something different. He'd grown used to her soft humming and subtle optimism. Today, there was only silence. "You're distracted," he muttered. "Did the world finally hit you back?" She looked at him, hurt flickering in her expression. "I'm just tired." He narrowed his eyes. "Tired of pretending you care?" That cut too deep. She said nothing, just reached for the blanket at his feet. But her hands trembled. He noticed, and instead of asking why, he attacked. "I knew it. You're like the rest, waiting for the will, hoping to squeeze sympathy into a signature." Grace flinched. "That's not fair." He didn't stop. "Nothing in your life comes without motive, I see. Even your kindness has strings." Tears welled up in her eyes. She backed away, voice shaking. "I've never asked you for anything." And then it happened. Her necklace slipped from under her scrubs, the heart-shaped locket. It hit the side of his chair with a soft clink. Robert stared, frozen, as if the world tilted sideways. His voice came out cracked, nearly broken. "Where did you get that?" Grace instinctively clutched the pendant. "It was my mother's." "What was her name?" he asked, though he already knew. She hesitated. "Caroline." Silence fell between them like a thunderclap. Robert's breath hitched. His mind raced through decades. Caroline's laugh, her eyes, her final plea before walking away. And now, Grace, the daughter of the daughter he cast aside, his granddaughter. His chest tightened, but he said nothing. Couldn't. Grace misread his silence. She nodded bitterly, eyes rimmed with tears. I should go. Clearly nothing I say or do here means anything. She turned, the necklace glinting against her chest. Robert tried to speak, but the words wouldn't come. The door shut softly behind her, and for the first time in years, Robert was truly alone, not just in body, but in soul. His fingers curled weakly into fists. "Caroline," he whispered, voice cracking under the weight of decades, "what have I done?" Outside, Grace sat on the stone steps of the mansion, wiping her face. Her chest felt hollow. Her kindness had been questioned, her dignity torn apart. But the way he'd looked at the locket, that wasn't anger. It was recognition. And deep down, something in her whispered, he knew. And he was hiding it. Robert didn't sleep that night. He sat awake in his chair, the pendant burned into his memory. That tiny heart had shattered something inside him, something brittle, something old. The truth had always been near, but now it had a name, a face. Grace wasn't just a nurse, she was blood. For days, she didn't come. A replacement nurse arrived, efficient, professional, and utterly cold. The silence in the house was louder than ever. Robert tried to act unaffected, but his body betrayed him. His fingers stopped moving again. His appetite vanished. Regret gnawed at him like a fever. Then, without warning, she returned. She didn't say why. She didn't mention the last time, just walked in, took a deep breath, and said softly, "Let's begin your therapy." Robert looked up, stunned. "You're still willing?" Her eyes were tired, but kind. "Not for you. For the man you might still become." That day, Robert agreed to something he had refused for years, physical therapy. His joints ached, muscles protested. He grunted, cursed, even cried. But he didn't stop. Grace stood by, holding his arm with firm hands and firmer patience. "You're stronger than you think," she whispered. He believed her. Outside those sessions, Grace still battled her own storms. Elena's condition worsened, hospital bills piled up. Grace took extra shifts, skipped meals, and walked everywhere to save on bus fare. But she never let it spill into Robert's room, until the day he saw her nearly faint. He caught her just in time. For a moment the roles reversed. He, seated but alert. She, trembling in his arms. "You're not okay," he said. She smiled weakly. "Neither are you." He stared at her. "But I want to be, for the first time. I want to be." Later that evening, Robert did something he hadn't done in decades. He apologized. "I treated you like a servant," he said slowly, "but you've shown me more humanity than I ever deserved." Grace didn't respond right away, just placed her hand on his and whispered, "Then be better, for real, not for me, for you." Something inside him cracked open. Not just guilt, not just shame, but hope. He began pushing himself harder in therapy, asked to walk again, asked for news about Eleanor. Quietly, privately, he began covering Grace's rent anonymously, and when Elena needed a specialist, the appointment was mysteriously paid for. Grace knew something had shifted. Robert wasn't just changing physically, he was softening, asking questions, laughing occasionally. One morning he said, "I used to believe love made men weak. I was wrong. You've shown me it's the only thing that makes us strong." Grace still hadn't connected all the dots. But every day she saw more of a man she could believe in. Not a billionaire, but a grandfather-shaped silhouette she didn't yet understand. And for the first time, both of them were healing. One step, one truth, one choice at a time. Robert had been staring at the fire for nearly an hour, a wool blanket draped across his legs, when he finally spoke. "Grace, may I see it?" She looked up from her chair, confused. "See what?" "The necklace, the locket." Her hand instinctively touched the small pendant resting against her chest. She hesitated, then slowly removed it, walking over and placing it in his trembling palm. He opened it with delicate care. Inside, a faded photograph, weathered, almost translucent with time, a girl, laughing, wild-haired, alive. "My daughter," he said softly. "Caroline." Grace's breath caught. Her heart stopped. "What?" He looked up, tears in his eyes. "You're hers." "Aren't you?" Her legs buckled slightly as she sat across from him, eyes wide. "She died when I was 4. I never knew my father. I only had that picture. And this." "I knew," he whispered. "I suspected for weeks. But the locket, it confirmed it." Grace stared at him. "Why didn't you tell me?" "I was a coward," he admitted. "I disowned her when she chose love over wealth. I cut her off, told myself it was for the family's sake, but it was pride, cold, poisonous pride." Tears welled in Grace's eyes. "She died alone, struggling, and I grew up in homes that barely knew my name." Robert wept silently. "I deserve your anger, your hate." She shook her head, voice trembling. "I don't hate you, but I don't know how to forgive you either." He reached out, not for pity, but for truth. "Let me earn it. Whatever time I have left, I want to use it to undo what I've broken. I want to know you, Grace." "I want you to know me, not the man in the papers, but the man who failed and is finally trying." She looked at him through tears, torn, wounded, but also undeniably connected. "This doesn't erase the pain," she whispered. "I know," he replied, "but maybe it can plant something new." In the following days, their relationship shifted. They talked, not as nurse and patient, but as fractured pieces of a story finally coming together. Robert asked about her childhood. Grace shared the pain. He confessed the names he'd cursed, the money he clung to like armor. Grace listened, not to justify, but to understand. One night she found a dusty box in the study. Inside were photos of Caroline, letters he'd written but never sent. "I kept her close, by hiding her," he said. "It was the only way I could survive the guilt." Grace held one of the letters to her chest, and for the first time, she whispered something she never thought she would. "I wish I'd known you sooner." Robert's voice cracked. "Now you do." And in that moment, the word grandfather didn't feel like a curse anymore. The room was quiet, bathed in late afternoon gold, when Grace finally said the words she'd been holding inside. "You ruined her life." Robert didn't look away. He nodded. "Yes, I did." She stood across from him, arms crossed tightly. "You banished her for love, for marrying a good man who just didn't fit your world. I was wrong, he whispered. And I paid for it every single day since. Grace's voice trembled. Do you know what it's like to grow up wondering why you weren't enough? To feel like your family erased you before you were even born? Robert's eyes glistened. I deserve your pain. I'll carry it if you let me. No, she said, voice sharp. You don't get to carry it for me, but maybe you can use it. Change something, redeem something. He nodded slowly. I want to. I've already begun rewriting the foundation documents. I'm turning the company into a charitable trust. Hospitals, housing, scholarships, not in my name, yours, Caroline's, Grace Foundation. It's already in motion. Grace blinked. You're serious? He gave a soft smile. For the first time in a long time, yes. Money can't fix what I broke, but maybe it can help others who never had a chance. She sat down beside him, finally. And after that, what happens to you? Robert looked down at his hands, still fragile but moving. I'll die eventually, but not before doing something good with what I built on the backs of people I ignored. There was a long silence between them. No anger now, just the ache of truth, raw and necessary. Grace placed her hand on his. I can't give you the past. I don't ask for it, he replied. But maybe we still have time for a future. They spent the next hour in conversation. Real conversation. Robert shared stories of Caroline as a child, how she once drew a castle in crayon on his office wall. Grace shared about the day she got her nursing license, alone in the back row, clapping for herself. By sunset, something had settled between them, a fragile peace, a beginning built from ruins, and just before she left for the night, Robert whispered, "Thank you for not giving up on me, even when I gave up on everyone else." Grace looked back from the doorway. I didn't do it for you, she said with a small smile. I did it because someone once told me that love can still heal what pride tried to kill. Months passed. The mansion, once filled with silence, now echoed with quiet movement. Nurses, planners, architects. Robert had insisted on converting part of it into the headquarters for the Grace Foundation. If this house was built from pride, he told her, then let it now serve compassion. He walked again, slowly, but without assistance. Every step was painful, but he welcomed it. Grace accompanied him down the hall each morning, her arm gently guiding him. Sometimes he stumbled, sometimes he cursed, but always he tried. I want to walk into that foundation's ribbon cutting on my own 2 feet, he declared one morning, even if it kills me. Grace, too, had changed. Not in spirit, her heart remained soft, but in presence, stronger, more centered. She had found not just her roots, but her voice. As director of the foundation, she was now giving scholarships to young nurses, funding clinics in underserved areas, and offering shelter to women escaping domestic violence. And she never forgot Elena. Her friends' treatments were now fully covered, and they'd even rented an apartment together in the city, something they once joked about when they had no heat in the winter. Robert began writing again, letters he never sent before, now addressed to Grace. At night, he'd sit by the fire and speak of things he never dared confess: fear, loss, love. "You've given me the one thing money never could," he told her one evening. "A second chance, and a witness." The Grace Foundation gained traction fast. Journalists came, stories were written, but Robert refused interviews. "Tell them to talk to her," he'd say. "She's the real legacy." Grace would roll her eyes, but in private, those words meant everything. One rainy afternoon, as they looked out the window, he whispered, "If I could speak to Caroline right now, I'd tell her she was right. About love, about life, about you." Grace gently placed her hand on his shoulder. "She already knows." Robert began to tire more easily. He needed longer naps, softer light. The doctors said his heart was weakening. He didn't fight it. "I've done what I came to do," he told Grace. "The rest is yours." One morning, she found him in the study, asleep in his chair, a letter in his lap. She covered him with a blanket and sat beside him, not waking him, just breathing the same air. He had become more than a patient, more than blood. He had become family. As she walked through the new clinic wing that afternoon, Grace looked at the sign above the door. The Caroline Room. She smiled through tears. Their story had come full circle, but there was still one letter she hadn't read. The one he wrote when he thought she'd never return, and inside it was the truth that would change everything again. Robert passed away on a Tuesday morning. Grace found him in his chair, peaceful, a soft smile on his face. The fireplace still glowed with fading embers, and his favorite blanket was folded neatly at his feet. On the table beside him rested a sealed envelope, her name written in careful script: Grace. Her hands shook as she opened it. Inside, his handwriting danced across the page, steadier than she expected. He'd written it weeks ago. "My dearest Grace, I knew who you were the first day I saw you. That locket, that voice, those eyes. You were Caroline's in every way. I didn't tell you because I was afraid you'd walk away before I could become someone worthy of your forgiveness." Grace sat down, the letter trembling in her lap. "So I pretended. I waited. I let you heal me in ways doctors never could. I watched you care for others, even when you were breaking, and I hoped selfishly that one day you'd choose to stay, not out of duty, but out of love." She wiped her face, reading on. "Everything I own is yours now. But none of it compares to what you've already given me, a chance to die without hatred in my bones, and a granddaughter I can be proud of. Go change the world, Grace, and when you miss me, find me in every life you heal. I'll be there. Robert." Her tears came quietly, no sobs. No collapse. Just a deep, aching gratitude he had known all along, and instead of using that knowledge to manipulate her, he chose to earn her heart. The funeral was simple. Grace wore a navy dress. Eleanor stood beside her, holding her hand. Staff from the foundation came, along with nurses, patients, people whose lives had already been changed by the work they started. Months later, Grace spoke at the launch of a new center for children in foster care. "Love," she said, voice strong, "isn't loud. It doesn't always arrive when we want it to, but sometimes it waits, quietly, until we're ready to believe again. She placed Robert's letter in a frame on her new office wall, right below a photo of her mother. Caroline smiled eternally in black and white, and the world, though still heavy in places, felt just a little more full of light. Comment down below where you heard this story from. Don't forget to subscribe for more just like it. Thank you for watching all the way through, and see you in the next video.